Hello, everyone, on this very nice evening, almost summer evening here in Munich at ZI. To start our new lecture series, Museen am ZI, with a guest speaker from the Musée des Arts et Métiers in Paris, is associated with an at least twofold joy for me. The Musée des Arts et Métiers is certainly not one of the 5 museums that visitors on a shorter trip to the French capital would have on their list. However, its collection is one of the most original and multi-layered ones that I know of in Paris, as it combines insights into the history of technology and craft, as well as into the history of their public transmission or mediation in an extremely exciting way. Secondly, to discuss objects from a technical museum in an art historical setting here at ZI might help us to think together through our possibly shared expectations of art and technology as being conceived as 2 separate spheres, at least in a modern or contemporary perspective. I am therefore all the more delighted to being able to welcome now Anne-Laure Carré from the Musée des Arts et Métiers tonight here at ZI. Anne-Laure holds a diploma in art history and museology from the École du Louvre in Paris, as well as a PhD in history from Sorbonne University. She devoted her PhD to the use of glass in architecture around the turn to the 20th century under the title Construire en verre de nouveaux matériaux pour l'architecture. As her many publications testify, she is a great specialist in the field of industrial glass production, among others. At the Musée des Arts et Métiers, Anne-Laure Carré has been ingénieure de recherche since 1995, where she was entrusted with a new conception of the museum's permanent exhibition for the materials and construction collections. Anne-Laure has been also involved in several international research projects, for instance, an ERC project on craft as cultural heritage, and another one on the use of color during the 19th century called Chromotop. In 2020, she curated the exhibition Top Modèle, une leçon princière au XVIIIe siècle, which was accompanied by a great catalogue. Based on these fascinating objects, she will give us tonight an insight into her work and the museum's collection. Please join me in welcoming Anne-Laure Carré for a talk on models for education or recreation.
Thank you very much, Leah, and I also want to thank Ulrich Pfisterer for that kind invitation, which is a great honor for me as well as a great pleasure. You will, I hope, forgive me for not speaking in German, as it is very schoolish, and I do feel more at ease in English. So models in museum as models, such ideas might have been very commonplace for visitors of past centuries, as it was indeed the first goal of museum, educating artists and craftspeople with examples of good taste, whether originals or copies when fine arts or decorative arts were concerned, encouraging the progress of science in the case of technical, scientific, natural history or medical collections. In archaeology, entire museums of casts and reproductions were organized during the 19th century and set up as models. And I should have, of course, I don't have to introduce you to this concept as it is embodied in this building. However, models also refer to a world in miniature, and they have the flavor of childhood and are linked with recreation. So I will go back to the definition of a word model. It has multiple meanings, ranging from an original for imitation or copy to a representation in miniature of something made or done. It originated in the field of architecture or sculpture before seeing its use broadened to qualifying objects as first steps or prerequisite in a creative process. In French, we distinguish between maquette and modèle, but English only speaks of scale model. The word maquette dates from the 1920s and was widely adopted in the 50s with the trend for model making, a popular pastime for teenagers and their fathers. It generally implies a close conformity to the original in terms of dimensions, whereas model still bears trace of its original ambiguity. In fact, a model may not be true to the original regarding the dimensions of all parts of the object. It can make use of different scales or different materials. My talk, Models for Educational Recreation, will try modestly to address the question of scale models in museum by stressing the diversity of their use and variety of significance. I will draw most of my examples from the Musée des Arts et Métiers, as I have been working there for a long time. If you come and visit the Musée des Arts et Métiers in the 3rd arrondissement of Paris, in what used to be a thriving neighborhood of artisans and manufacturers, you will probably consider it as a museum of models. Although the collection in all other typologies, instruments, machines, tools, samples, and above all, drawings and photography are much more numerous. The Conservatoire was set up during the revolutionary era in 1794 with the ambition to develop technical innovations and sustain the national industry. Among its first departments were a library, a draftsman's studio, and a collection of tools and models. Those were inherited from the King's Mechanic Cabinet, bequeathed to King Louis XV by Vaucanson, a famous automata maker and inspector for the silk manufacture, and with collections taken by the young republic to the emigrated aristocrats. From the beginning, scale models were among the first items collected. Among these, we can still identify this beautiful model of a windmill designed at the Hôtel de Mortagne and with the accompanying drawing, or this model of an organzin loom for making thread. After the creation of 3 chairs for mechanics, chemistry, and economy in 1819, the collections took the pedagogical turn even more firmly, as professors were expected to enrich the galleries through their professional networks. Industrial and universal exhibitions provided ample occasions to enrich the galleries. Special budgets voted on the years of major exhibitions between 1851 and 1900 helped to acquire examples of technology. Among the models, my special focus will be the models of workshops. What is their significance for their makers and for their viewers? How are they operating in the galleries? What does it mean to explore the workshop from a miniature point of view? And also, could they embody invisible knowledge and impermanent gestures? I will discuss model in 4 categories, starting with examples of aristocratic taste with a very special collection from the late 18th century, belonging to the Duke of Orleans and also known as Madame de Genlis's models. Then I will examine the models designed specifically for museums or engineering schools by model-making companies. And in a 3rd instance, I will discuss models as promotional objects or keepsakes, and to finish, speak of digital models, augmented or virtual reality experiences. In 2020, as Leah reminded me, when at a rather ill-fated period as COVID only permitted a short opening, I devoted an exhibition to this collection entitled Top Modèle, une leçon princière au XVIIIe siècle, as these models are not in the permanent exhibition anymore. And here's a view of the exhibition with portraits of Madame de Genlis as a rather elderly lady. She was born in 1746 and died in 1830, just in time to see her pupil, Louis-Philippe, become King of the French. Madame de Genlis was a lady in waiting for the Duchess of Orleans, and in her memoirs, as she became governor of both princess and princes in 1782, she calls them joujou or toys and claims she had the idea of their design, but no other contemporary sources corroborate this. They do not stand the test with other princely toys, however expensive, but could be compared with such displays as the repository of the Royal Society of Arts or Christopher Pinchbeck's collection in London. And the Orléans were well known for their Anglomania, but also keen supporters of novelties, including new machines. They had multiple financial interests in different companies, and particularly in metalwork. It is also well known that the display of collections in galleries was an aristocratic marker, and the Orléans, cousins of the King of France, fabulously rich, certainly held their rank, with a very large paintings gallery, displays of shells, mineralogy, botanical specimens and models in the Palais Royal, the Parisian palace. The models, confiscated in 1794, came into the museum's collection in 1802 as biens d'émigrés, as the children of Philippe Égalité, the future King Louis-Philippe, his two brothers and his sister had all fled France. In the archives of the Conservatoire stands a document entitled Extrait de l'Encyclopédie, and it lists missing pieces from the model, showing the importance they held. In fact, we know that only exceptional pieces were earmarked for national collections, as the revolutionary France leaders were most eager to sell or exchange for army supplies or necessities. By some incredible chance, we also have the account of a visit to the Conservatoire 2 years later, in 1804, by a young German scientist, Johann Friedrich Benzenberg, which will help me introducing these. And here's the title of his brief in 2 volumes, the account of his journey to Paris. And this is the text in German, which I can let you read while I tell you about the models. There are 13 of them, 8 small and 5 large. The collection originally included 17 models, 3 models of gunpowder workshops and a rolling mill workshop for tin plate, unfortunately disappeared in the 19th century. 5 models still carry a scale in ivory or bone corresponding to 1.5 inches per foot or 1/8. None of them shows any figure. And I will introduce them in the same order as the text of Benzenberg. So first is the chemistry laboratory, which measures around more than a meter, a little more than a meter long, and is approximately on the basis of 43 and 47 in height and width. And here's the little cartouche with the name and the scale. And this is the plate from the encyclopedia, which is the source, and you see very obvious that the artist who made the models has drawn his inspiration from this engraving from Venelle, but he interpreted it in a different way. As you see, all the alchemical signs of the planets and the different metals are on the chimney. Maybe I can use this device. And you still see here, I don't know if you notice, starting with gold at the center, all these alchemical signs. And another view of the details showing you the very quality of these objects. The second one is the aquafortis distiller or nitric acid manufacturer, which is a bit smaller. And I'll also show you some details, and just to let you imagine the atmosphere in such a manufacture. A beautiful painting by De Machy from the Musée Carnavalet, which shows such an installation. And we know that there were many of them within the boundary of Paris and not far from the Conservatoire, actually. next ones were the four very big models. They are more than 3 meters long each, and they all describe, in this case, earthenware, with the furnace and then the workshop, and at one end here the clay and the well from which clear water was needed for the whole process. And this is again small, the small instruments and devices used to model the objects that you see here, pots and pans, and in the background as well, next to the potter's wheel, all the little objects on stands that are ready to be put into the furnace. This big one is part earthenware and part porcelain. This is the big porcelain furnace as described by the encyclopedia. Next is the gazette used to enclose the porcelain, who are fragile and might be stained by fumes. And this mill is for making le blanc, or the glaze, the la couverte, that's used both for earthenware and porcelain. This is the second part of a porcelain, and I'll show you better image. You see here the potter's wheel, and there the molds and different parts of the objects waiting to be assembled in the furnace. The last of these very big is the tile potter, who designs simple objects such as floor tiles that you see here that are dried before being put into the oven, and other simple vessels for kitchenware mostly. The ordinary potter, I'd say. The next model is a plumber's workshop with the mandrel for pouring pipes. And if you remember that Benzenberg's text, he was particularly interested by this one, and especially by this device here, which you find the source directly from the encyclopedia, which is used to make pipes. On the other side is a table that's used to make lead sheets that were used for to cover buildings. And during the exhibition, I could show some pieces retrieved by the architects during renovation at Versailles, which had on the reverse a little sand grains that are used in the process. I'm sorry. And then Benzenberg talks about the locksmith's workshop that you see here, with really, again, all the instruments and the vise here are very delicately made. And the figures from the Description des Arts. And in the end, the carpenter's workshop. Again, a medium one sized, which is around 90 centimeters long. You also see, sorry, the quality of the different instruments. Again, the glue and the different tools used by carpenters to drill or to sharpen the wood. And the illustration from Roubaud, which he published in the Description des Arts. And then a few images of the ones that Benzenberg doesn't mention in his text. The nail factory, the lead bell foundry workshop to make small bullets, in fact, that you see here. All the devices, there were different operations, and here's a view of encyclopedia. And this is the sand foundry workshop. with all the details. And the biggest one is the lead rolling mill of Romilly, the largest and most spectacular of a model, more than 4 meters long. And again, part of the engraving showing the lead plate being formed and then transferred with the crane into the rolling mill, which is not shown on this image. Sorry. All these models are made from the plates of Diderot and d'Alembert's Encyclopedia, or from the Description des Arts, but they usually draw their source from different plates and combine illustrations. I will not discuss here this inspiration, as the Encyclopédie itself proves a never-ending source and a very rich subject. But in his Tableau de Paris, published in 1782, Louis-Sébastien Mercier gives us a clue on the makers of the model. And I will quote him rather extensively. The Perrier brothers are currently engaged in a curious and useful work, that of reducing to small size all the arts and crafts. No instrument of the mechanical professions will be missing, nicely executed in relief in the proportion of 1 inch per foot. This collection will belong to Monseigneur le Duc de Chartres, which is the other name of the Orléans. To immortalize the arts in this way is to give them their respected sanctuary of palaces. I will try and drink a little bit more. And then he goes on saying, if the ancients had had this foresight, we wouldn't be lamenting the loss of an infinite number of processes that had to be regained through the painful slowness of centuries. We could have found in a small chest buried in the ground, in Herculaneum or elsewhere, the discoveries of all the ingenious peoples who preceded us. The written encyclopedia will always be vague, limited and inadequate compared to the very object that strikes both the eye and the mind. It is seen in all its facets. Relationships become palpable, and there is no longer a dead language to learn, no uncertain or time-consuming calculations to make, most often leading to an injuriously profound error. So the chronicler Mercier insists on the attractiveness of 3D as a learning tool, and certainly this resonates with the pedagogical ideas of Madame de Genlis. From her day-to-day journals and those of her assistant, Charles Gardeur-Lebrun, we know that the princess went visiting factories and were encouraged to make objects. Louis-Philippe tells in his memoirs that he had to make a table and a cabinet that he gave to the poor, and that strong emphasis was put on practicing crafts. And for example, in October 1782, Charles Gardeur-Lebrun took Louis-Philippe and his brother Antoine to Chaillot to admire the new steam engine bought by the Frères Perrier, the same that did the models, from James Watt. These two brothers were entrepreneurs, or venture capitalists, if you forgive me for the anachronism, but they were no tradesmen. So they were until recently attributed to François-Étienne Calas, who became a very successful businessman himself, also building steam engines and cast iron. But a recent interpretation of an archival document led to the attribution in their making to a polymath, artiste mécanicien Mathieu Laveron, a figure still rather obscure who traveled to the to Jamaica and did also built a sort of an organ, but it just tells of the many challenges in identifying and telling the stories of a fabulously rich Orléans family's many collection. So if the aristocratic marker is definitely part in the making of these models, as well as the trend for English novelties, like race horses or clubs, the pedagogical use of a model is not to be denied. I will now move to my second part and talk about pedagogical models for the galleries and demonstrations in 3 dimensions. The generalization of secondary education and the emergence of civil engineering schools, like the École Centrale des Arts et Manufactures, created in 1829, called for a larger production of models which were used for teaching. Some firms developed and were successful in this area, such as Eugène Philippe, Pierre and Alexandre Clair, and Dijon. From the archives, we know that models, and especially mechanical models, were extremely costly, and the Conservatoire only ordered a few items per year in the first half of the 19th century. Audiences with minimum of technical and industrial culture frequented the Conservatoire, and collections had to be understandable by as many people as possible. It might be by the use of different scales. And I'll show you here a model of a loom with, you can see the size of a shuttle is completely disproportionate with the rest of the loom, but it is figured so visitors can understand how it is made. Or by another material used to reveal a hidden aspect. And I show you here a steam engine with glass cylinders to be able to see the course of a piston inside the cylinder. So cuts, transparencies, variations in scales, tinting, change of material, inscriptions are all tricks used by manufacturers to give models an educational character. The construction and layout of models in the showcases would allow visitors to interpret them as they are. And this is a model of a Siemens glass furnace a bit later, and you see which is fully and completely can be disassembled to show the different parts, especially the regeneration chambers, which were the new invention by Siemens. Or here in this beautiful metal punching and riveting machine, the cut on the head showing the mechanism. Or again, on this other example of a puddling furnace, there are 3 models made, 1 for the complete object and 2 with cuts on either on the horizontal or the vertical size, which shows also the importance of these devices for the public, as well as the real novelties. On the others, on the other hand, were designed to be manipulated, not by visitors, but rather by the teachers or their assistants in the context of higher education, in particular with the help of levers, steering wheels, or cranks. And here's an iron ore crusher used to separate the metal ore, and the crank is put in motion by a helps to put in motion the cam gear. Or another spur gear from Théodore Olivier, or also, which might be more familiar to you, oh, sorry for this horrible picture, the beautiful mechanism by Jakob Schröder, a German technologist from Darmstadt, if I'm correct, whom the director of the Conservatoire had seen in London in 1862, and which he immediately ordered a large series of them for the Conservatoire, and you see the crank at the back to be put into motion. I'll show you. Here's the crank here. And in the end, a little image of the amphitheater of the Conservatoire during a chemistry lesson by Eugène Pelligot, who is reproducing Lavoisier's experiment of oxygen, separation of oxygen and carbon monoxide with the help of gasometer, which are transparent here. And before addressing the case of Eugène Philippe's wheel manufacturing workshop, which will be my principal example for this part, I would like to make a small detour to introduce a remarkable collection of a Musée Crozatier in Le Puy-en-Velay, which is a small town in Auvergne, but it was the birthplace of Pierre and Alexandre Clerc, the manufacturers of model. The museum presents part of its large collection in a rather spectacular display at the top floor of the museum, with some being put in motion. And you might see the levies here that help them put in motion with an electrical source. Pierre Clerc was particularly encouraged by the director of a conservatoire to produce models, and he was clever enough to design, alongside the costly and beautiful 3D models, animated painted board, such as these ones, showing only some pieces in 3D and with the help of cranks, which could be moved with the help of cranks. And this steam engine that you see here can be found in the Musée Crozatier, but there are other examples in the Museo Laboratorio Aldini Valeriani in Bologna, or like this one in Quebec at the Musée de la Civilisation, which now hosts the collections of the Old Seminar of Quebec. So back to my subject of a wheel manufacturing workshop. Yeah, so I shall stop a little bit longer on this spectacular model. Again, more than 3 meters long and weighing almost 300 kilos. It has a scale of 1/5, and all the models for the different machine tools were built between 1832 and 1839. Eugène Philippe was the most important supplier of the Conservatoire and produced more than 60 models between 1830s and 1848, some of which were very large. He was born in 1803 and is a typical representative of the first generation of Parisian mechanics who founded their workshops before 1830 and prospered under the July monarchy. That is Louis Philippe's reign. He won prizes and medals for the improvement of wood saws in particular and took out a large number of patents. In 1831, he began working for the Conservatoire by building a Stephenson locomotive with its tender, a very new equipment for the time and very recently imported into France. The exhibition of industrial products in 1834 confirmed his success, and he received a gold medal, particularly for his models intended for the Conservatoire des Arts et Métiers. At the top of the list was his continuous paper machine, which you see here. And the jury pointed out its series of machines for the manufacture of wheels. It is made directly after an equipment Philippe designed and built, real size, for Parisian coach builders, a company he had invested in, as well as for the workshops of the Messagerie Générale and the Messagerie Royale, the two biggest coaches company of their time. So this large model is interesting because it shows the high level of mechanization of a very widespread artisanal manufacture, wheel writing. And I show you here, I want to draw your attention to the little label showing his name and the proud display of his workshop, of his craft. And you see in the center a machine, a drill used to drill and form the central piece of a wheel. So it shows the strong division of labor between the machines that produced the elements and standard models and for series production. It is also about the organization of a workshop, the arrangement of the element, and the typical distribution of a centralized motive power by pulleys and belts. Installed in the museum in 1840, it had a mechanism capable of putting in motion the different machine tools. Today, it is still in action with a small electrical engine and a recorded comment on the different operations. You see here another step of either bending the segments of the wheel at the end of a workshop, the rays that are assembled onto the central part. And there's a little forge at the end, which helps putting the metal. And this is the display in the museum today. Despite the emphasis on pedagogical use, the question of models designed by inventors also intervenes here. It was a classic request in the multiple competitions to be able to show the jury a model of the intended machine or improvement. I already mentioned the repository of the Royal Society of Arts in London, but the French Société d'encouragement à l'industrie nationale also had a cabinet of model, which was transferred to the Musée des Arts et Métiers in the 1860s. Just as patents are an important way to grasp innovation, models should be considered as archives just as well. I'll move to my third part and talk about models as promotional objects. It is probably the largest category raised here. Countless examples could be called in, but to support my talk today, I wish to concentrate mostly on two remarkable examples, the Rue de Rivoli and the models for the Statue of Liberty. So this is the model of a house under construction on the Rue de Rivoli, and it is dated 1879. It was made by the entrepreneur Émile Desplanques and bought by the museum the following year through a special subsidy voted by the parliament, as its cost was equivalent to 1 year of acquisition budget for the museum. It is an exceptionally detailed document on the machines and tools used on a construction site at a prestigious Parisian address, where the real building still stands without major modifications today. Desplanques' model focuses on the masonry site, and he demonstrates the order of march in the construction of a 5-story house with an attic. The heart of a model is a real skin-up view of the materials used, as well as the various operations. And a journal article from the 1879 from La Semaine des Constructeurs gives us clues to what's happening on this site. The scale of a model is 1/20th, and each side measure more than 1.5 meter. The stone facades are carefully scaffolded, and you can see 2 large wooden cranes on each facade, and they're equipped with devices to help elevate the different material. The stones arrive on heavy carts, and you see them here. This is another view of the model. So these are the stones, and they are directed towards the large crane by means of plank. They are also surrounded by a specific rope called brailleur and mounted one by one to their bed of seats. And the little numbers all corresponded to the different bed of seats. Then we can see the laying on the floors, the joists, the struts, and the metallic elements are then hooped. And here it's you can see the plaster piled on the wooden platform with the little bags of plaster to be opened up at the last moment, the trowels and troughs used by the master masons. The model maker did not represent the finished floors of the first floor, which I hope you could see here, which is just an artifice to let us know what's happening on the ground floor, and to let us see all the other mechanical devices that are used. We also notice that there are different elements used to raise the materials. Here you see this little metallic, how do you call it? A sort of well, transmission, and yes, and everything is animated with a locomobile, another steam engine, and that's situated on the ground floor. You also see that he's put his name as a publicity, a sort of an advertisement. Desplanques, we don't know much about him, and he had an obituary notice published in La Construction Moderne, telling us that he started as a mason and had quickly become a master journeyman, then an entrepreneur. He published 2 books, a manual of contractors and a collection of regulations, ordinances, and decrees. We have no idea why he really had this model made, certainly for advertising purposes, but also and probably as an educational tool, as he was researching and advocating a rational organization of a construction site. In fact, in the paper of La Semaine des Constructeurs, he's able to give us a precise record of a number of working days of the various trades, as well as the details of material used. It is a material proof of the advantages of his economy of site management. He says he employed 79 men, and the construction costs 545 francs per square meters for the masonry, for a built area of more than 500 square meters. Still, as you have noticed on this site, everything is perfectly still, and there are no workers to be seen. So on a different way and with more historical evidence to back up the promotional intention, I will then move on to the models for the construction of the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty originates in an idea from Édouard Laboulaye in 1865 for a project of a monument celebrating the American independence. Auguste Bartholdi imagined an allegory of liberty holding a torch and illuminating the world. It is a spectacular work of art as well as a considerable technical challenge. Gustave Eiffel designed the metallic pylon onto which copper sheets were assembled to form the statue. Fundraising started in time for the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition of 1876, where the hand and torch were exhibited, as you see here. The head and bust were finished in time for the 1878 Paris exhibition. It was 12 meters high and it admitted public who could get a view of the Champ de Mars from the diadem, as you can see on the engraving. In 1875, work started at Gagé-Gauthier workshops, Rue de Chazelles in the 17th arrondissement. And from 1881 onward, the statue was slowly assembled. It took almost 3 years. Parisians would therefore see the 46-meter-high statue overlooking the Plaine de Monceau. Visitors were admitted on the premises of Gagé-Gauthier, and Bartholdi sometimes is known to have given reduction casts or small models, like in 1877 during the visit of General Ulysses Grant, but also photographs or engravings, depending on the sum you were giving. And I want to show you a very recent acquisition from the museum, a fragment of copper in a little box engraved souvenir d'une visite aux travaux, which was mostly bought at that time and kept in families. So donated by Bartholdi's widow in 1907, the cast plaster at the scale of 1/16 is an original made at Gagé-Gauthier in 1875 and produced from preliminary studies enlarged, alongside the full-scale fragment of the left ear and the index that you see here and that are now in the museum collection. We also have 2 beautiful models. They were probably made by the Gagé-Gauthier workshops as well and served as attraction for visitors. They are very close from the photographs of Charles Marleville and Pierre Petit, photographers chosen by Bartholdi to record all the different steps of this extraordinary site. And you can see how close it is from the photographs. They are also remarkable by the presence of figures, a first in our review, giving an accurate idea of scale as a general animation of the model. And as you notice here, the 2 visitors, it is almost as if we are standing ourselves inside Gagé-Gauthier's workshops. So I show you a few details of these models and where you can follow different steps of the enlargement with here the workers with a large compass taking the measurement again, and also the other workers working with plasters or finishing carefully considering the accuracy between enlargement and the finished figure. There is also a label, as you may have in a museum, and affixed on each of model. And this reads, for the cast enlargement, sculptors use rulers and plumb bobs to measure, enlarge and execute the colossal model. Carpenters make wooden templates to take the imprint of a model. See the templates on the neck and front of a bust. The copper sheets are stamped into these templates as shown in the other model. So the other model is a one for copper sheets hammering. And metalwork is carried out by applying copper sheets to wooden templates and pressing or beating them into shape with a mallet, which you see in the first ground here. Where there are parts to be soldered or complicated shapes, the copper is brazed with a blowtorch to soften it. The parts are finished by beating with a hammer. For assembly, we use a divided frame and plumb bobs. As for the plaster model, the copper parts are adjusted and fixed on iron armatures modeled by the blacksmith according to need. So here's another view of the model where you see all the workers very busy at work, and some photographs of the Gagé-Gauthier workshops. A view of the forge. And this is the view of the little label. So these models also help to recall moments that are now inaccessible to us, the making of this exceptional statue. In fact, remembrance and keepsakes, mementos, is another feature quite common to models. They help to trigger memories and keep alive a tradition. My principal example for this will be this beautiful and detailed model of a silversmith and precious box maker, a tabletier workshop. It is approximately 50, 69, and 44 centimeters, almost a cube, and all elements are completely independent and made with materials equivalent to the ones used in the workshop, as in the Orléans model. It comes from the silversmith Tardivaux, who was listed Rue Greneta near the museum. It is made out of sycamore and ebony and was made in his spare time by the donor's father, Jacques Parfait Tardivaux, who died in 1866. It came with a detailed caption diagram detailing the position of the various tools and their names. And these tabletiers became quite their profession grew in importance as the vogue for nécessaire cases designed to house toiletries, mathematical, surgical tools, games, sewing items became very popular. The tabletier also works with metal, fabrics, and leather. He often collaborates with a goldsmith or an engraver who affix the customer's number on the cartouche provided. In this model, you can clearly see the furnace and bellows in the background, used to heat the metal, which can be worked on a very small anvil, which is here. And you also see the drawing bench, hand rolling mill, which to make wire, and they can also be re-drilled using a press, like you see here in the foreground as well. Artisans work on workbenches lined with leather aprons, and the floor is covered by wooden clay pans used to collect precious metal scrap, as with goldsmith or watchmakers. A lathe in the background is also used to work wood or ivory. And we have stocks of raw materials, enamel pucks, tortoise shell, placed in large tubs. Here's some details of the object. The museum holds a lot of other models of that kind of workshops made by artisans. I show you here a locksmith workshop by Charles Ernest Babin, who was given by his widow. It had been exhibited during the Universal Exhibition of 1900. Or this small carpentry workshop given by the family of Pinard. Again, a trimmings workshop from the 1840s. I could show many other examples of such models, mementos of trade and technical gestures, like relics for their trade. But I will now move to the last part of my presentation. So, today, ordering a scale model of a workshop would probably seem an old-fashioned idea. Digital environments are now widely used for training. Transport industries, medical world rely heavily on them for training pilots, nurses, and doctors. At the Conservatoire, a digital twin of a chemistry laboratory is used to train students about safety procedures, for example. All these examples of what is sometimes called serious games have found echoes in museums as well as in recreational contexts. And this is another little detour, but I wanted to tell that also museography and case designs had also been called for rescue. And I show you some images of a formidable museum, which is not the Musée des Arts et Métiers, but really worth the detour. In Troyes, it's La Maison de l'Outil et la Pensée Ouvrière, where the display has also a lot to say about the legacy of André Leroy-Gourhan and Georges-Henri Rivière, but it's probably another subject. I had thought about telling you about a project of a young Japanese artist who contacted me about Madame de Genlis, but I will move on and tell you about a project I was part of, a EU-funded Heritage 2020 project called Mingay, in which I took part between 2019 and 2021. And those were, again, ill-fated years of COVID. And the aim was the preservation of intangible heritage and crafts, as well as public awareness of craft know-how and technical gestures. My part in the project was about glass blowing, but it also involved museums in Chios in Greece and Krefeld in Germany. We chose to do some reverse engineering on a glass decanter that you see here, which had been bought by the museum in 1842 for the use of a chemistry professor, Eugène Péligot, the same one you saw on the engraving of the amphitheater. We contracted with Serfab, a glass apprenticeship studio in the east of France, to reproduce the decanter while capturing the gestures of a glassblower in the workshop. So you see Jean-Pierre Mathéus, the principal glassblower, equipped with this sensor suit to record all his gestures. The aim of this experience, led by Forth, a Greek university from Crete, was a project with computer science being to record the immaterial heritage of glassblowing, a particularly challenging craft. To mediate this project, we designed a temporary exhibition, Le Savoir Vert, with the aim to put the visitor in the position to confront craft gestures. And quite simple gestures, as you see here, different visitors who are sitting on a working bench, which is a glassblower's bench, and there's a camera, and there's a film, and whether you had to really execute the same gesture as the glassblower, and if you deviate, there'd be a sonification to tell you that you were not doing it properly. So there were 3 very simple gestures showing how, in fact, difficult it is to reproduce them. My last example will be another research project my colleague Isabelle Astig has been involved with, called Lab in Virtuo. And in this case, it is more to help preserve and contextualize a very large industrial machine, a milling machine used in the car industry. NumaSurf is a numerical command milling machine designed by Pierre Bézier for the Régie Renault in the late 60s. It was the first system enabling digital design, and it is a testimony to the beginnings of computer-aided design. But it was in a dilapidated state, and it's extremely large and heavy. It's about 22 tons, and with all the different parts fits in a volume of 15 square meters. So from the start, we knew that we weren't in a position to really acquire the full objects. So we decided on a mixed acquisition. We selected a few relevant items, the milling head, the control panels, and we had it digitized to keep a memory of the whole. And we again had very recently in March an exhibition to test the interest of the public for such device. And with the help of special glasses, you could animate and set in motion the particular kinetics of a milling machine to play. And there were also informations on the evolution of a machine since its creation in 1970 to expose technical and social changes brought about by the digitization in the automotive industry. We are still reviewing interviews undertaken at the time of the exhibition. So virtual environments are therefore a potent way to engage in a world that is not ours, the world of industry. By the means of a recreational interface, one can doubt it fully conveys the difficulty of the harshness of the industrial world, the heat, the terrible noise, the pressure of a machine that literature and cinema have been so fascinated. However, imperfect immersive means are today, without doubt, we should expect a lot of improvement in public acceptance of these devices. To conclude, I wish to emphasize some ideas about model. I will put aside the first and obvious idea of models being advertisement for their makers, as they were primarily collected to engage science and technology with a more hands-on approach, as a superlative drawing, and whenever possible, they were put in motion. But as conceptual and material aspects are different, working in 3 dimensions is less seen as a scholarly academic practice, even for scientists and technicians today. Model may also act as remembrance object, triggering memories or witnessing a forever gone moment. They allow us to approach professional environments unbeknownst to us. And to finish, I'd like to, on a less industrial note, but with the same objective of allowing a glimpse of a sheltered environment, I do not resist showing you a nun box made by cloistered nuns, very often Carmelites. These boxes were little models sent by nuns to their families, usually during their first year in convents, to let them imagine their day-to-day life, and they are emotional testimonies of religiosity. Lastly, models are so delectable to contemplate by the amount of details, craftsmanship, and meticulousness in execution. The virtuosity of scale reduction, the miniature world so fascinating, have links with childhood, just like the doll's house or the electric train sets. These miniature workshops, souvenirs of ancient know-how and their embodiment in tools and machines, are also capable of triggering emotions. And another contemporary work by a Japanese artist, Amabose Taturo, who exhibited in front of the Palais de Tokyo in 2018, this doll's house, which was a favorite of the public. Thank you for your attention.